Is everyone, are we ready to talk about what we're really here to talk about? All right. Good? So this talk is about zero trust. Is everyone kind of like done with zero trust? Like we talk about this all the time, like here's what zero trust is. I will briefly highlight my definition of zero trust, but why I put this talk together was before NIST came out with a standard, before CISO came out with a maturity model, everyone's like, zero trust is just a fad. And now, I, Wolfgang Goerlich, who work with CISOs and work on these types of projects and programs, am hearing, well, once we have zero trust in place, we will no longer have security problems. And I don't know how we went from fad to silver bullet, but it's driving me nuts. So within the next 50 minutes, I'm going to tell you guys all the ways to break zero trust. That's what this talk is about. That's what a pre-mortem is. That's where we're going. My definition for zero trust is as follows. A dynamic trust boundary, short-lived for a session, for a connection, that we extend or revoke based on policy, based on what we see from trust signals, based on what we see from telemetry. That's what I'm saying, right? We're not going to have a flat network. We're not going to trust you because you're in a user group. We're not going to trust you because you have a trusted device. We're going to trust you based on policy. We're going to check every damn time. Sounds great. That solves everything. Wait a minute. So in this talk, I want to imagine a future. What a pre-mortem is, if you guys haven't done it, is a post-mortem based on an imagined future, right? A post-mortem, you break down what happened, you figure out how things broke. Pre-mortem is the opposite of that. You imagine a future where things went wrong, right? We want to imagine a future a few years from now using your time machine of choice where 5 years in, we've got zero trust in place. It is extending and revoking trust boundaries. People are authenticating with strong multi-factor. Our devices are known and enumerated. Our apps are trusted. And we're going to say, how can things go wrong? I want to pause here. I first gave this talk about a year ago. Since then, some of the things I'm going to talk about have already happened. Also, since then, adversary emulation companies have reached out to me saying, tell me about that. I want to build that as part of my tool. I want to test zero trust programs. So, well, when I first built this deck, I thought a lot of these things were hypothetical. They are coming a lot faster than the 5-year time horizon I imagined. So, let's talk about a couple different ways. Projects and security culture, mistakes that happen on identity level, mistakes that happen with policy enforcement. First off, if you leave this talk with any of these ideas, Wolf said zero trust is a bad idea. No. Wolf said MFA is a bad idea and a waste of time. No. Wolf said, why bother even looking at devices? No, right? There's no reason to do network segmentation. If we do ZTNA, no. Policy enforcement isn't worth it. No, I'm not saying any of those things. What I am saying is, in the history of cybersecurity, however you want to demark that history, from the first antivirus, the first firewall, all the way back to 1960 with the first password, we know one thing. Every time we put in place a control, the adversaries work around it once there's enough friction on them and it's disrupting their business. They will do that in this process too. So 5 years from now, you've got a zero trust project in place, but it didn't really work. It didn't really deliver the benefits. We said it would do all these things, but it's not, right? It's sort of deployed and it's monitoring over here and it works for our critical assets. I used to do consulting all the time, and I would love asking questions like, how are your controls? They said they're great. I'm like, what's your scope? Do you really need to know the answer to that? Because it's small. And the reason why is people. Shocking, right? Right? So imagine the future. We're reading the news. It's 2028, 2029. A large company with a well-developed zero trust implementation was breached by a sophisticated actor. We all know sophisticated adversaries. But through our back channels, right, we're having some conversations. It's the after party at CypherCon. A guy who knows a guy, or maybe the guy himself is at the party. He's like, I know what really happened. It's the people. Project didn't get done. Wasn't funded. I didn't get the staff. There's this thing that I call the cottage to goblin cycle. You guys remember goblin mode? It was like the word of the year last year. No? Anyone else? couple people do, right? Like, yeah, goblin mode. I'll tell you about it. They already know. It's cool. We're on. So goblin mode is this idea that happened in like 2022, 2023. Why wash dishes when I can DoorDash? Why do I really need to shower today? I'm only on Zoom. It's fine. Do I need to do laundry? Well, if I have a clean shirt, I can just wear these sweatpants one more day. Goblin mode. Now, if you back to the beginning of the pandemic, right? Like April 2020, what were we doing? We were doing like cottagecore, right? We were baking bread. My wife used to bake me bread. If you see her in the Securing Sexuality Conference booth over there, say, I hear you used to make Wolf bread. That was nice. It would help me. Maybe she'll make me bread again. She hasn't. I'm not saying it's goblin mode, but it feels that way. We were baking bread. We were making quilts. We were sharing sourdough, right? This was new and exciting. We were interested. This is exactly this cottage to goblin mode cycle where we start off very passionate, doing cool things, and 2 years later we're like, forget it, I don't need to change my sweatpants, is exactly what happens with just about every security initiative. I used to do SOC consulting. We would call it the graveyard of SOCs because we would go in and there'd be like, Curator, we tried Curator, but it didn't work. Splunk, we tried to implement Splunk, but it was too expensive. Sumo Logic is kind of half installed for our domain controllers, and we got an A in our audit, right? And now we're the fourth vendor coming in to install SIM, trying to untangle all these things. What happened? The first 6 months, they were great. They baked bread, and they sent logs, and they built reports. 2 years in, no one cares about it. They ignore the project. Exact same thing we're starting to see happen in zero trust capabilities today. 4 years ago, people would be like, Wolf, can I get a call with you? Can we talk about how to sell zero trust to the board? And now it's like, Wolf, can I get a call with you because the board approved zero trust, but we haven't done anything, and now I need to report back. We've got to make sure we maintain momentum. Part of that is making sure we got the right people in the room. One of the things that I've done for the past several years is did an annual report with Scientia. Scientia, you may remember from such hits as the Verizon Data Breach Report. They worked with us. They surveyed 5,000 organizations or 5,000 individuals globally, annually, 20 to 30 countries, asking questions about what are you doing and what are you getting? What are you doing and what are you getting? One of the things that we talked about in the most recent study was zero trust every single year. But in terms of zero trust, how mature your zero trust is and how good are your relationships? We found this out. People who have good zero trust have executive competence. They report it twice as likely. Executives love them. Awesome. People who have zero trust that's mature, say their CIOs love them. Peer buy-in, twice as likely. Awesome. They see their organization is on board. Security culture, twice as likely to report strong security culture. Awesome. I'm like, ha-ha, zero trust is awesome, right? Doesn't it sound like it? Like zero trust is awesome. I got mature and they love me. Found the same thing in the data about business continuity and disaster recovery. Like, well, maybe if you're talking about business, like, yeah, we found the same thing in incident response. I'm like, well, maybe that's trauma bonding. And they're like, and we found the same thing in the endpoint. I'm like, I give up. I give up. Like, no one is saying, you know what, CISO, you are awesome and I love you because you've got software on my endpoint. What is happening here is good security programs are built on good relationships, and they sustain energy and excitement by maintaining those relationships. And they fail when those relationships are not maintained, and they fail when people do not take into account that no one cares 2 years later, right? When it turns into a goblin. So, next point about this is scope, right? One of my favorite sayings is out of scope. Our out of scope is in scope for the adversaries. Where do the criminals hit you? Do they hit you where your best controls are? Like, are they really going to go after your PCI environment, which is really heavily locked down? I'll tell you what, I was running a red team once, and they brought me in to evaluate their SAP. And like, ha-ha, we've got you. You won't break into this. We've got it locked down. We've got multi-factor. We've got segmentation. We've got this. We've got that. We had consultants from big four company here lock it all down, and it's fully patched. I'm like, awesome. Bad news. My red teamer already stole all your data. And they're like, well, how did you do that? I'm like, well, it's a funny story. There's a nightly extract that dumps it to a read-only file system that we just got access to because it's shared publicly. Right? But our scope was great. Yes, but your risk is not. So when we think about a lot of these implementations, most people have, organizationally, 1,000 to 2,000 applications. Most zero trust programs, 500. What about those rest? We don't know. We don't know. Sure, they're low risk. Most organizations have a few hundred endpoints, maybe a few thousand endpoints. How many endpoints do we really have? We don't know. We don't know. When we actually look, by the way, at zero trust programs rolling out, invariably we find 2 to 3 times as many applications that they thought they had, 2 to 3 times as many devices that they thought they had. Invariably, every single time. But our MDR said we had 10,000 endpoints. Yes, but when we look at who's accessing your applications, it's 30,000. Oh. Also, another fun thing about scope is this for our workforce? Is this for our customers? I was doing an IAM program assessment, and I was talking to this company. They had everything right. Like, how are you doing onboarding and offboarding? They're like, here's my process and here's my evidence. How are you handling access control? Here's my RBAC. That's fantastic. How are you doing background checks? Every single year, blah, blah, blah. That's fantastic. What about for contractors? They're like, we'll get back to you. They had none of those controls for contractors. Fun fact, 2/3 of their staff, contractors. But that 1/3 was really secure. That was awesome. So we also need to not only think about the life cycle of the program, the relationships in the program, but the scope in the program. Part of that scope is legacy technology. Legacy technology isn't going away. What this data shows is people on-prem versus in the cloud versus mature programs. So you're more likely to be mature if you're on the cloud. Makes perfect sense. But if you look at that number, there's still a ton of people on-prem. Also, fun fact, let me just ask a question. Is anyone doing repatriation projects? No? This is the new trend, by the way. CIOs are all excited about this. We can save money if we take data out of the cloud and put it back on premise. Yay! After we just spent 10 years of getting into the cloud. Woohoo! Let's do it again. So not only does legacy not go away, but legacy also gets built upon, and then the security is usually on the new stuff, right? Where are the startups working? Find me a startup that's working on mainframe security. No one is. It's all Kubernetes this, clusters that, AI this other thing, right? And what do we do with the legacy? We just ignore it. We just ignore it. This is my favorite drawing, by the way, of legacy technology. This is how I feel every modern organization is. It's about 10 to 20 years of technical debt being pulled forward by the latest container AI thingy. It's fine. It's fine. We'll secure the robot. Don't worry about the rickshaw. It'll be okay. So we need to really be careful not to over-rotate and ignore existing, often much larger tech bases. So first thing about conducting a pre-mortem. Where are we going to make mistakes? We're going to make mistakes by not maintaining good projects, by not maintaining good people, by not maintaining good scope. But wait a minute. That's all people side. This is a hacker conference. Let's talk about the hacking side, right? Strongly authenticated identities is key to zero trust. We extend or revoke trust when it's strongly authenticated. So imagine against 2028, 2029, let's say we're at a roundtable. So we're at a roundtable, right? And we're going and talking about programs, and a person from our industry, someone we've known for a long time, maybe we've had some drinks with them or seen them at a CTF or whatever. They're like, yeah, so I was breached. Zero trust in place. Everyone's doing multi-factor. Like, what happened? I'd tell you more about Chatham House rule, right? That applies. What happens is, if we take a look at this idea of this dynamic trust boundary, this short-lived, tight scope trust boundary, let's look exactly at the authorized user and scope. First off, there's 1,000,001 ways these days to bypass multi-factor. That should not surprise anyone. I am regularly asked in the media, isn't it shocking to people that we now bypass multi-factor? No! When we rolled out SMS, we said this is a terrible idea because you can SIM swap and do SS7 attacks. This is not a surprise to anybody, except for the people who wrote the checks. We said, if you enable multi-factor, everything will be great. They're like, okay, here's the money. And then a couple years later, I'm like, oopsie. So We know that a number of factors can be bypassed. SMS can be bypassed. Push can be bypassed. There's push fatigue attacks going on, bombing, proxy attacks. Anyone play with Evil Nginx or Evil Jinx, depending on? A couple of people are laughing. A couple of people are shaking their head. If you're shaking your head, no. Check it out if you want to have some fun. Because basically what it does is it pretends to be a valid website, and you're like, I'm logging into the valid website. And it does multi-factor, and it's like, okay. And then it proxies that multi-factor to the actual site, comes back with a session token, and then they take that session token and run. Sweet. Sweet. By the way, the counter to that is FIDO2 phish resistant multi-factor. That's where we all need to go. But people will downgrade factors, they'll proxy them, they'll phish them, they'll bypass them. Also, we've seen this in the Okta breach, they'll log in and they'll enroll on a lower factor with no factor, and then they'll enroll their own phone. So I've now got your password, but I got my multi-factor, woo, and I'm logging in with multi-factor all day long. So give me a trust boundary. On the device side, it's similar. How do we do device authentication? Well, we do cert-based authentication. We do agent-based. You can do domain joined, right? These are different ways of doing this. However, there's 1,000,001 ways to bypass these. Spectre Ops has a paper out, if you want to check it out, that what they basically do is similar to Evil Jinx, but on the cert level, they intercept the request, they change it to their cert, they send it back, so now you're authenticated with their cert, and then they redirect their session. But I thought cert-based authentication was the gold standard. Yes, it is. However, we still need to make sure how that cert-based communication is going on. Also, what about domain joined? Well, it turns out there's Linux distros that you can download, load up the tool on. You can spoof that domain joined response as well. But wait, you say, that doesn't make sense. I want to do something even better. I want to make sure that not only am I doing domain joined and cert-based, but I'm also doing agent-based, because I know agents will communicate back. So how are agents communicating back to the cloud? What the policy settings are? They're communicating them back with a RESTful API. So what happens if, hypothetically, you intercept that and change that conversation, like pause it on the machine and then complete that transaction in the back end? If you're following an OAuth flow, you can actually do that, especially if you can get an access token to complete that flow. So even with the agent-based, it's just sending a RESTful API and a web request, and we all have 1,000,001 ways to bypass those. So step one, if you're thinking about this from a pre-mortem perspective, look at all your multi-factor side and see how to break it. Step two is think about your device side. Now, I do think we should do device authentication, by the way. I really do think this is an important step. This is one that adversaries are not doing a lot around right now. It makes a lot of sense. I mentioned most organizations, like if you got 10,000 employees, you probably have 20, 30,000 devices. That's a pretty big attack surface. But there's 16 billion devices on the planet. So going from 16 billion down to 30,000 is pretty nice. If you can go from 30,000 down to the 3 that are mine, that's even better. If you go down to 3 that are mine and then be aware that still we're going to want to look for other ways in case an adversary or a red teamer is doing device spoofing, you're doing really well. If you ignore it all and let 16 billion devices in and check nothing, the red teamer has a very easy day. And for those red teamers in the room, you're welcome. Just relax. You'll be done in an hour on Monday. You write the report on Friday. Play Cyberpunk in the middle of the week. I don't care. All right. Anyways, this is one of the reasons why the way that I wrote this talk, because I got so angry at the multi-factor fatigue attack press that kept asking me. I was like, we all knew this, but none of us really did a good pre-mortem on it. One of the things I say all the time is all better mousetraps do is breed better mice. Like every control we put in, we need to be thinking about what the next step is. But all too oftentimes we put a control in place and then we move on to the next fire without really thinking about where the adversaries are going to move next. Without a good pre-mortem, I think we really get ourselves into hot water. All right, so we've got this strongly authenticated user and this strongly authenticated device, which is awesome, right? And we've done the analysis. We moved people off of phishable factors onto FIDO2, and we've done the analysis, and we use a combination of cert-based and domain joined or domain joined and agent or whatever. So we got some good controls there, and we're monitoring for these things. Once they got those things in place, they're making an end-to-end encryption connected tunnel to the resource. That's what Zero Trust recommends, an end-to-end encrypted tunnel for end-to-end. Now, what could possibly go wrong there? First off, whenever you hear end-to-end, your first thought should be what's happening on those ends, because that's where the adversaries are going to move. On the endpoint itself, you're going to see lie-in-wait malware. You're going to see adversary in the middle. We're already seeing these types of attacks. I was helping a financial services firm. Their accounting team got whacked by this. Lie-in-wait malware, all the right controls, just monitored the browser until they logged into the banking system. When logged in the banking system, it executed a series of scripts and transferred funds out. We had all the right controls. So lie-in-wait malware, adversary in the middle attacks, compromised browser. This was one that I was talking about. I'm like, session cookie theft, right? Like, we all remember stealing people's cookies. People were like, this is so boring. We always talked about stealing cookies. I'm like, but you need to remember that, like, once you do all these controls, all these fancy Zero Trust things, you get a session token, and that's either a cookie or an in-memory token. People are like, yeah, okay, fine. Maybe I need to pay attention to that. I'm like, yeah, because someone's going to do something bad with that. Like, yeah, but we got browser protection. Okay, great. And it's on the endpoint. Okay, great. And you talk to web developers, by the way. Web developers are great about this. They're like, but it's on the endpoint. It's on the front channel. I don't trust the front channel. Like, but you're trusting that authentication token, right? Yeah, but we don't worry about the front channel because we're mid-tier, end-tier. Okay, great, awesome. Did you guys see what happened with Beyond Trust in Okta? Perfect example. So I see some heads nodding. I don't see a lot of heads nodding, so I'll run through this real quick. Beyond Trust was talking to a legitimate Okta support professional. The legitimate Okta support professional said, we need a HAR file. A HAR file is HTTP archive. When you create a HAR file, it dumps memory, tokens, everything in your session that moment to this lovely zip file that you then upload to Okta so they can troubleshoot. Awesome. That will include all your tokens, because that's what they're trying to troubleshoot. Unfortunately, an adversary had intercepted and pretty much completely owned Okta's support queue. Saw that come in and went, whoa, Beyond Trust, that's an awesome target. Grabbed that zip file, extracted that token, logged into Okta in the front end, and started trying to take admin actions. But wait, we say, we've got multi-factor, we've got FastPass, we've done all the right things. But you got a string of text that gives you access. That's in the front channel that can be stolen. To Okta's credit, the front UI also had additional device checks. You remember I was saying check the device? And the front UI went, we don't trust you. To the adversary's credit, they went, oh, that's weird, we'll use the API. And they used the API and got it anyways. So, gotta protect those browsers. Everything comes out of that string. And then finally, what about just classic extortion, right? I can bribe someone, I can extort someone. Any of the classic cons still work, and we still see those in highly secure environments. You just convince the person to give the token to the adversary for any variety of different reasons. So where will we slip up? The mistakes we'll make in this area is not doing good user authentication and not taking into account current attacks, not doing good device authentication and not taking into account good attacks, relying on single strings after authentication and not doing sufficient and subsequent checks. And all in all, believing that we got Zero Trust and we're safe. I'll tell you one more little interesting thing here. I said end-to-end. Right? Zero Trust is end-to-end encryption because we're trying to make sure that no one can read our sensitive corporate data on the network. That would be bad. We all work remote these days for the most part. People are adopting ZTNA. Anyone doing ZTNA yet? A few of you guys, yeah? So the ZTNA vendors, awesome. You create an encrypted connection to them. They create an encryption connection to your resource. Sounds good. I've got end-to-end. Wait a minute. They also offer network analytics, network DLP, inline inspection. How are they doing it with an encrypted connection? They're not. You connect to them, they decrypt it, they run it through the security stack, they re-encrypt it, they send it to you. I don't know when, but I will put money on it. Next time we're at CypherCon, if this hasn't happened, come up to me, I'll buy you a drink, and I won't just give you my drink certificate, because that would be cheating. I'll buy you guys a drink. One of these vendors is going to get popped. And you're going to hear, oh, this adversarial or nation state actor has been in line looking at all the traffic on one of these major ZTNA vendors. It's going to happen, for sure. All right, so let's talk about policy. So we've done the strongly authenticated user thing. We've done the strongly authenticated device thing. Back to 2028, 2029. Say we've had a security breach, okay? It hit us. It hit home. But we're using zero trust, right? Our CIO shouting it, you told me zero trust would fix this. And our board's like, where did your money go? And I'm like, let me tell you about goblins. Don't do that. No, that's in internal baseball. That does not play well at a boardroom. We're going to get all pulled into the room with the CISO, and they're going to ask a question like, what just happened? And here's what happened. It was on the policy level. So I mentioned dynamic trust boundary, right? Short lived, tight scope, yada, yada. This policy level is what's really important. So how does that policy level inspect and make decisions? First off, is it even inspecting and making decisions? Remember, we still have 10 to 20 years of technical debt. So there's a very big likelihood this is a technical legacy system or out-of-scope system that no one has wrapped policy around. Or how about this? This never happens. We threw it in place and we put it in monitor-only mode. And we said, we'll get back to that and we'll turn it on. Sure. Or we think it's running. I was working with an FI, insurance company, and everyone told me that their network security system was fantastic. Very few false positives, right? When we look at DLP on the network, we look at this system. When we look at adversarial actions, we look at this system. Our UEBA, this system. Like, this system is phenomenal. I want to know this vendor. I want to know the license SKU. I want 2 of them. I go sit down with the network company and the network team. I'm like, hey, I hear this is fantastic. I hear it's got few false positives. I hear it does everything, slices, dices. It's fantastic. Before I even finish, they're laughing, like practically like falling out of the chair laughing. I'm like, what's so funny? Like, I can tell you why there's no false positives. It's not plugged in. It's not plugged in. He said, no. When we upgrade the network, the CIO said, well, we don't have money for the new span port. We'll get that in the next rev. Just leave it alone for right now. It's fine. And that was 3 years ago. So first question, is your policy even working? And most people don't test their policies, right? How often do we put a control in place and we don't test per control? We do goals-based pen testing or compliance-based pen testing. We call it good, but we don't actually like hammer some of these very specific actions. So maybe it's not working. Maybe it can be spoofed. I mentioned that the OS and agent and browser can be spoofed. We all know that. It can also be spoofed to the API layer. I mentioned that, right? Oftentimes there's an agent that's making this call either locally back to the system. Fun thing to try, by the way, is look at your control, whatever it is, your policy enforcement, your VPN, your ZTNA, your MFA. What happens if they can't reach that network? I don't know, just for fun, put the IP addresses of the network in the local host file, or the DNS name in the local host file rather, and route them to 127.0.0.1, right? So now when it makes that call, it looks down. What does it do? Could be. Or turns off. Is the fail open or fail closed? Yeah. Yep. So some will be configured to fail open. It all depends on how the admin put it in place. So this is one of the things that we'll oftentimes check. That's one of the reasons why the product you mentioned will do that, because early days, this was a thing that people were doing all the time to turn it off. Students would do it. So part one is, what if we just prevent it from connecting? And maybe admin said, you know what, if our ZTNA tunnel goes down, we just want people to get to apps because we don't get yelled at. So we'll just fail open. So you can block it, you can spoof it, and also you can just like do traditional social engineering. I'm trying to get in, I can't get in, my desktop won't. This is a new computer, it's a loaner, I lost my phone, right? All those same social engineering attacks that people do all the time that take down, I don't know, hypothetically casinos. So we want to make sure we're thinking about all of those as well. I already mentioned this part, the fact that even if the policy gets completed, even if everything goes right, it's oftentimes a SAML assertion or a JOT or session token. Adversarial in the middle, replay, tampering, session stealing, session theft, all these attacks are going to come back and be even more exciting because we've put so much confidence into the fact that we've done policy analysis in the beginning. Thank you for that. In addition to those types of attacks, that's assuming one policy. What we're actually seeing roll out is zero trust implementations that look something like this, right? We've got the first policy for the user and the next policy for the device and another policy for ZTNA and a third policy for VDI, and then we're checking on the Casimir and checking it locally. And what's fun about this is where's the problem? If there's a problem, we don't know. It's very hard to troubleshoot. So people are doing a couple different things. I asked a vendor about this, by the way. I'm like, what would your answer be to integrate all these policy engines? He's like, oh, we got the answer. It's a perfect answer. I'm like, thank God. Because in my mind, like you're checking things 12 different ways. And if any one of them goes wrong or is spoofed, I have no idea where the problem is. He's like, no, we got the perfect answer for that. I'm like, all right, what is it? He's like, just turn them all off on the rest of them and trust us. I'm like, you're joking me right now. He's like, no, that's what we tell people. If you're just not checking all those other policies, you won't have any conflicts. Love vendors. But I also talked to a friend of mine who's a CISO, and he's like, oh, we just check everything 12 different ways for defense and depth. And I'm like, does that work? He goes, sometimes. Sometimes there's conflicts. Sometimes my Intune says I'm compliant, and my ZTNA says I'm not. How do you resolve those? I don't know. That's the help desk problem. Like, I don't know what I'm more angry right now as the vendor or the internal IT team. Now, what we want is people to actually like chain and integrate these things. And there's some work on that with Shared Signals Initiative. There's some teams that are working on that. But as you might imagine, a lot of these vendors are rolling out tools that don't necessarily integrate well. Or if they do integrate, it's like, we integrate perfectly. Pass me a SAML string. Once the other policy says it's fine, I'm like, but that's the problem. I don't trust the SAML. So, end-to-end leads to adversaries attacking our ends. Part two of that is targeting these other endpoints, right? Looking at OAuth OEC problems, looking at API endpoints. I mentioned what happened with Okta and that mess. You know, we look at like least privilege and trust boundaries as a way to provide security, but it's also a way to provide additional threat vector, right? Because while zero trust is enabling dynamic authorization, it's got to integrate with our existing governance. It's got to integrate with our administration tasks. So let me give you a real example of this. I was talking to a team, and they're like, we are going to save so much money by putting in zero trust. I'm like, no, you're not, but tell me more. And they're like, we are taking out our DAM, database application monitoring. I'm like, you're taking out your DAM? Like, yeah, we don't need it anymore. I'm like, you don't need monitoring for your database anymore. They're like, no, because only trusted people and trusted users can get to it. Like, great. What happens when your trusted admin on your privileged workstation decides, I'm quitting on Friday and I'm deleting all your tables? They're like, oh, we're not going to be able to save money. I'm like, no, you're not. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Those privileges still exist, right? These permissions still exist, and we still are going to be attacked through these different threat vectors, which gets to an interesting observation I've had. If you've been looking at zero trust for a while, you may remember John Kindervag started this whole idea. This goes back to 2010, and in 2010, we had a really cool model. It wasn't a cool model, but you'd have a communication come in and you run it through a policy engine. And if everything checked out, you connect communication to something else. And at the time, it was all network communication. So it was an IP address and a port, maybe a protocol if you're fancy, going to another IP address and a port, maybe a protocol if you're fancy. For those of you know, that's a tuple. And you're making that connection. If you pass that policy engine, you are golden. And he's like, this is kind of stupid because we've got this crunchy exterior, this chewy interior. And this chewy interior is where the problem is. And he came up with this idea of zero trust. We need to elevate the policy. I'm like, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. And arguably, I think like the story of cybersecurity is chasing chewy, right? There's always chewiness somewhere. There's always implicit trust somewhere. There's always somewhere where we made assumptions that allow us to go weak. However, as we roll out zero trust, I started to think about it a little bit more. Because effectively what we're doing is we're running everything through a policy engine, and then once you're in, you're in. Now, arguably, it's better policy. Arguably, we're up the stack. We're checking the application. We're checking the browser. We're seeing if you're patched. We're seeing if your current behavior is correct. We're making sure you're not coming off Tor. We're checking to make sure your IP addresses you're communicating are not on some threat list. We're doing a lot of things, right? Arguably, it's much better. But in 2028, 2029, if we got all this in, if everything is great, you're now in the application. You may not be in a database, or I'm sorry, in a flat network where you can get to everything, but you're in an app where you can get to anything. And that chewy is basically just moved to a different level. And what this leads me to believe, and if you're in AppSec and you're thinking about what interesting problems are, what this leads me to believe is, think about all the investments we made from 2010 to like 2015 about network monitoring, network security, network DLP, network everything. Why? Because our networks were chewy. And our network became part of our security layer. And then we went, that's lovely, let's put it all in the cloud and have everyone work from home and we'll forget all about that. We are now going to have a state where our applications are chewy. So what could be very exciting in the next 5 to 10 years is building out good telemetry in our apps and making our apps part of our security model. So they're no longer chewy, but they're actually part of the signal that feeds back in and removes people if they're doing something inappropriate. That would be awesome, if we can get there. So where are things going to go off track? What are the mistakes we're going to make? We're going to say we run it through policy. We can trust them. We know historically that doesn't work. Once you're through the policy layer, once you trust them, there are a lot of other ways that things can go wrong. And it's not even to say that whatever they're doing with that trust is appropriate. See also malicious insider, see insider threat, insider trading, yada, yada, yada. See every time anyone has gotten in, looked just fine, smelled just fine, was on the greatest device in the world, patched up, but was really had malicious intent and whacked a database or whacked an application or anything else. I think maybe the real breach was the mistakes we made along the way. That seems like a lot of doom and gloom. I'm sorry, guys. What did I miss? Anyone see anything in here I missed? You can tell me afterwards. Sometimes people are like, yeah, but wait a minute, I saw this. I'm like, that's fine. I love to hear that. Huh? Hope? What I missed was hope. Oh, that's a good one. I always have hope. I am keynoting a conference this summer, and my topic is hope, which seems weird. Yeah, it really is. Like, how have we gotten better? Because we are getting better. Better mousetraps breed better mice, but we're all very smart, and we know how to build mousetraps. Usually what happens is we get very diffuse and distracted by all the things that don't matter, or we don't know where adversaries are going. But I think what's really fascinating about doing pre-mortems is I do have hope. Like everything I've covered here, we can fix. Next 5 years, we can fix all this. Absolutely.
What's your favorite thing you talked through that you think gets a hopeful outcome?
Application security as a signal. Back to doing shared signals. So the question for the recording is, what of everything I talked through am I the most hopeful for? I think we can get good policies in place for devices. I think we can adopt 502 so we don't have phishing. Phishing will move. We can talk about that. That's a whole other talk. I think we can get good security controls around the device so they have to jump through a whole bunch of hoops to do it. They will. There'll be a CypherCon talk. Look for it in 2026. But I think the idea of once they're in the apps, actually instrumenting when people move data or click things that they don't or have behaviors that aren't appropriate and using that as a trust signal, glorious. There was a vendor who was showing me their e-commerce engine, and they were able to find a bot that every other control missed. And they're able to find that bot because of what they track on is where people look and where people click on a website. Creepy. See also my talk about please don't monitor all this stuff and store this data. But they look at all this stuff and they found that there was this pattern of certain requests that would always click on this white space. And when you looked at it, for whatever reason, the bot was interpreting this as where they need to click. No human did that. So once they knew that pattern, they implemented a stop for it, and they did it randomly so the adversary didn't know that they were caught. And they were able to stop all the bot traffic. Stuff like that is really cool. Like people behave in fairly consistent ways. Bots behave in very consistent ways. That's where I'm hopeful. But I think when it comes to pre-mortems, when it comes to these things, we really need to make a game out of it, right? We get into cybersecurity because it's fun. We get into this because it's exciting. It's a challenge to know where the bad guys are going to go and stop them. I love the idea of making things a game. Could be any kind of game. Oh, go ahead. AI can make things harder down the road because LLMs are non-predictable outputs. So if you wired up an LLM to click around, or not maybe an LLM because LLM's language, but if you wired up ML to more accurately model human behavior, absolutely. But no adversary is going to do that until we get all this stuff in place. So I do think we could buy ourselves 2, 3, 4 years. And by that time, hopefully, the other ML AI tools that are supporting security will catch up. And then we can just let them fight and we'll go out, retire, and go for drinks. So speaking of games, I have a theory that the type of board game you played as a kid sort of determines your career. I don't know if that's true. Think about what games you played. Not Ataris. Did you say Atari? Atari. Like, yeah, I played. No, I mean board games. Oh, I do love me some Atari. And I loved how speaking of the visions of the future, I loved how Blade Runner thought like Atari would be everything by 2020, right? Atari. No, I'm thinking like the classics like Sorry or, yes, Parcheesi, Uno. In my mind, if you love to play Operation, you probably were meant to be a CISO. You gotta have that steady hand and it's buzzing a noise at you every time you get anything wrong. That's sort of like how my life feels all the time. I say this because of anyone who could have used a good pre-mortem, it was a guy, 1964. The term, by the way, pre-mortem was invented in 2007 by Gary Klein, in case you're interested. So I feel bad for the guy in 1964. He had no chance. He didn't even know, the term wasn't even around. But 1964, John Spinello invents the game of Operation. He invents the game of Operation and comes up with it as a school project. An interesting point to all you younger people, follow this along very carefully. Invents it as a school project. People are like, this is awesome. His dad's like, you know what, you should like make money off this. He's like, I don't know how to make money off it. I'll tell you how you make money off it. You talk to Marvin Glass. Marvin Glass, by the way, Hasbro. Marvin Glass looks at him and goes, that's a cool game, kid. Good job. He's like, thanks. He's like, I'll give you $500 for it. And a job. He's like, I would love that. He takes the $500. Never got a single cent afterwards. Never got a job. How much money did Hasbro make off the game Operation? For those of you young in this industry, watch your ideas very carefully and choose your partners very carefully. For those of you who are my age and thinking about this as a parable for zero trust, we never really know where our investments or our ideas are going to lead, but we can look at past performance as an indicator of the future. And I do think when it comes to zero trust, it's really like the pieces that define the game. And one of the things from a pre-mortem perspective is you tear about those pieces, you look at each layer and you ask yourself a very simple question. What can go wrong? If it's 5 years from now and we've got a breach, what went wrong? By doing those things, turn them over to your red team and have them test it. Turn them over to your people building apps to make sure that they can build good defenses around it. Bang on your vendors and say, why are you decrypting and inspecting my traffic? Or why are you failing open, to your point earlier about how some vendors will not fail open. Really ask those questions at each level. Do a good pre-mortem when you're implementing security controls. And I think, back to hope, I'm going to end on the theme of hope. I'm hopeful that we can actually get ahead of some of the problems we're going to see in rolling out these security capabilities. Any questions? That's it for me, guys. Questions, comments? All right. Yes, sir.
So SSL inspection and decryption, wonderful. Right?
Yeah.
Wonderful. As a whole, you've got to have some type of insight into that. That's the only way to see if I've got suspicious packets, right? So as a whole, you're saying, don't turn it on or don't do it. It's a privacy issue. Is that what you're getting at, or something else?
So the question is SSL inspection. You got to do it. Great tool. But we're also saying from a zero trust perspective, we want to keep the traffic unencrypted or encrypted end to end. So, it is a great tool. And it's a great tool because there's a lot that network traffic reveals and a lot of goodness that we can use to apply security controls to. If we've got good control over it, like I don't necessarily mind SSL inspection added a perimeter that we own. I am concerned about SSL inspection at a vendor who may be a much larger target. That's where my concern ends up being. And also, the question becomes, can we get that same visibility at the endpoint? One of the reasons we do SSL inspections is if we don't have good endpoint visibility, right? So if I don't have good endpoint visibility, that might be the only thing I can do. If I do have good endpoint visibility, then I don't need to decrypt the packets. And also, back to ML, there are some really intriguing applications of ML analytics on encrypted packets that can actually highlight attack signatures without decrypting. So there may also be some ways that we could implement some discovering some controls without having to inject that weakness. But SSL inspection is a really good point of what I was saying, which is every one of our attack controls, every one of our defensive controls becomes an attack surface. And as a security practitioner, you're always making that judgment call. Is this the right control and do I need it? Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
How do you suggest tackling the problem? Say you've got to implement a nice ZTA architecture in place. You're securing all the applications. You're primarily a cloud-based company, but then you start discovering like downstream SPs OAuth. Prime example is like the company has Slack OAuth to G Suite, then OAuth to Okta. You get your downstream OAuth underneath.
So
You have different session tokens, different refresh tokens associated to them. What creates problems?
yeah, the question is, imagine you have everything in place with zero trust. What about OAuth and OAuth SP and relationships and delegated access? I would repeat what I said earlier, which is history of cybersecurity is a history of chasing Chewy. And that is very Chewy right now. I had a good friend of mine whose organization lost their Azure tenant because the Azure admin enabled delegation to an adversary for OAuth to his tenant, and the adversary immediately took it over and booted him out. At the OAuth level, there are no good controls because they're trusting people who are authorizing things that they're authorizing correctly. I mentioned phishing earlier. I said phishing will continue. I'm expecting that phishing will be more OAuth and less traditional click on this and or you're going to get fired. So the problem you highlight is a very real problem. I don't have a good solution for it. In the Microsoft space, they are putting controls around OAuth applications and how those get approved and everything. And so what I expect is going to be more controls around how those delegations are made. But in the near term, we're trusting people, and we all know how that goes. That doesn't sound hopeful. I'm back to not sounding hopeful again. All right. One last question. Anyone have a final one? All right, I hope you guys have a great CypherCon. Thanks so much for hanging out with me.